Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that the tranquility of a rational soul is not disturbed by noise unless it chooses to be. This is not a poetic idea meant to comfort the weak. It is a strict observation about power, dignity, and self-command. The Stoics understood something modern life constantly hides from you. Not every call deserves a response, not every challenge deserves acknowledgement, and not every voice deserves access to your attention. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not avoidance, it is judgment. In a world that rewards reaction, the disciplined mind learns restraint. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, yet people still rush to answer, explain, defend, and justify themselves at every provocation. They believe response equals strength, clarity equals virtue, and engagement equals courage. The Stoic sees otherwise. He understands that every answer costs something. It costs time, emotional energy, and often authority. This is not about arrogance or coldness. Epictetus made it clear that wisdom begins with knowing what is within your control and what is not. The impulse to answer everything is rarely about truth. It is about insecurity, fear of misunderstanding, or hunger for validation. The Stoic path does not eliminate speech, but it disciplines it. Words become tools, not reflexes. There is a quiet authority that belongs only to those who are not easily summoned. They do not rush to explain themselves. They do not argue their worth. They do not chase the last word. Their calm unsettles those who seek reaction. Their silence speaks more precisely than most arguments. This is the foundation. The rest follows from understanding why restraint is power. The hidden problem is not rudeness, conflict, or misunderstanding. The real danger is unconscious obedience. When you feel compelled to answer every message, accusation, or demand, you are no longer directing your life. You are reacting to it. This reaction feels normal because it is socially rewarded. People call responsiveness maturity, explanation responsibility, and defense honesty. Yet beneath this behavior is a quiet erosion of self-command. Most people believe silence equals weakness because they fear being misjudged. They imagine that unanswered words grow stronger in the minds of others. Stoicism exposes this fear as illusion. Reputation, as Marcus Aurelius observed, is something granted by others, not owned by you. When you rush to correct every perception, you surrender your peace to external opinion. You are perceptive enough to feel when answering costs you more than it gives. You sense the drain after pointless exchanges, the subtle loss of authority after over-explaining, the regret after reacting too quickly. Yet without a framework, restraint feels risky. Stoicism provides that framework. It teaches that not every stimulus deserves a response, and that power often lies in refusal. Refusal to engage, refusal to justify, refusal to be pulled into another person's emotional economy. The first Stoic question is simple: who benefits if I answer? Epictetus advised his students to pause before every action and examine its purpose. Many answers are not given to clarify truth, but to soothe ego, either yours or someone else's. Consider a moment when someone questioned your decision publicly. The instinct to respond rose immediately. You felt heat, urgency, and the desire to explain yourself fully. When you did respond, the explanation did not satisfy them. It only invited further questioning. This is not coincidence. Explanation often signals availability for negotiation. Psychologically, people test boundaries through provocation. A challenge is less about content and more about control. When you answer impulsively, you accept the frame they set. You allow them to determine what deserves your energy. Seneca warned that the wise person does not enter contests that do not matter. The Stoic response is not silence for its own sake. It is selective engagement. You ask whether answering serves your values or merely relieves discomfort. If the answer is the latter, restraint is the rational choice. Calm non-response frustrates manipulation because it denies the reward of reaction. Over time, this discipline reshapes how others approach you. They become more precise, more respectful, or they disappear. Both outcomes are acceptable. The Stoic does not measure success by persuasion, but by self-command. Each unanswered provocation strengthens your authority over yourself. The second question follows naturally. Am I being invited into confusion? Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself not to be dragged into the turbulence of other minds. Many people communicate not to exchange understanding, but to discharge emotion. You may recall conversations where logic dissolved the moment you responded. Facts were ignored. Tone escalated. The discussion became circular. Your words did not clarify. They fueled disorder. This is because confusion thrives on engagement. It feeds on the belief that every misunderstanding must be resolved immediately. From a psychological perspective, emotional dumping seeks containment. When you answer, you become that container. You inherit agitation that was never yours. Epictetus warned against lending your mind to those who do not govern their own. The Stoic response is to recognize when clarity is impossible. Silence then becomes an act of discernment. You are not obligated to fix chaos. You are not responsible for another person's inner order. This restraint is often misinterpreted as indifference. In truth, it is respect for reality. Some minds are not seeking resolution, they are seeking relief. By refusing to answer, you force them to sit with their own unrest. Over time, you learn to speak only where words can land on stable ground. This preserves your energy and sharpens your judgment. The Stoic does not fear unresolved tension. He understands that peace does not come from constant clarification, but from knowing when clarity is impossible. The third question addresses power directly. Am I being measured? Insecure people often provoke not to understand but to compare. They seek reassurance of their position by forcing reaction. Perhaps you noticed how certain remarks were designed to elicit defense. They were subtle, indirect, and dismissive. When you answered, the dynamic shifted. The other person gained confidence. This is because reaction confirms relevance. Stoicism recognizes this as a dominance pattern. Control is tested through access to your attention. Marcus Aurelius warned that allowing others to disturb your mind grants them authority over you. The Stoic response is strategic silence. Not passive, not resentful, but deliberate. You do not answer challenges that are meant to elevate the challenger. You conserve your voice for moments that align with your purpose. This silence unsettles those who rely on comparison. Without reaction, their measurement fails. They are left facing themselves. Over time, this builds an inner hierarchy. You answer principles, not personalities. You respond to substance, not insecurity. This recalibrates how others perceive you, but more importantly, how you perceive yourself. You stop seeing silence as loss and begin to recognize it as command. The Stoic does not need to assert dominance, he simply refuses to surrender it. The fourth question concerns growth. Will answering keep me small? Seneca observed that constant engagement with trivial matters shrinks the soul. Not because the matters are loud, but because they distract from what matters. You may remember periods where your attention was scattered across debates, explanations, and defenses. Progress slowed. Focus weakened. Nothing catastrophic happened, yet momentum disappeared. This is the cost of unnecessary response. Psychologically, distraction masquerades as responsibility. Answering feels productive, but it often maintains stagnation. Growth requires periods of isolation and discipline. The Stoic response is withdrawal with purpose. You accept that some connections will weaken when you stop answering. This is not loss. It is filtration. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. By reducing exposure to trivial exchanges, you preserve mental clarity. This discipline is lonely at first. Silence creates space, and space reveals who depended on your reaction. Over time, that space becomes strength. You redirect energy inward toward craft, character, and command. The Stoic understands that growth is quiet. It does not announce itself through constant speech. It matures in restraint. The final question is the most difficult. Can I remain silent without resentment? Many people stay quiet outwardly but argue internally. This is not Stoic silence. It is suppression. True restraint requires emotional command. Epictetus taught that events do not disturb us, but our judgments about them do. Silence without inner clarity breeds bitterness. You may recall moments when you chose not to answer but replayed the conversation repeatedly. The body was still, but the mind was reactive. This is unfinished discipline. The Stoic response is acceptance. You allow the misunderstanding to exist without internal protest. You release the need to be seen accurately by everyone. This emotional restraint is power. It signals that your peace is not hostage to recognition. Over time, inner silence aligns with outer silence. Reaction dissolves. When this happens, your words change. They become fewer, slower, and more precise. People listen because you do not speak to be heard. You speak because something must be said. This is Stoic silence, not withdrawal from the world, but mastery within it. Taken together, these principles form a single discipline, self-command. Stoicism does not teach avoidance. It teaches hierarchy. You place reason above impulse, purpose above provocation, and dignity above validation. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus all pointed toward the same conclusion. Freedom begins where compulsive reaction ends. Silence is not the absence of strength, but its refinement. When you stop answering automatically, you reclaim authorship of your life. You choose when to speak, why to speak, and whether speech is even required. This creates peace, not because the world becomes quieter, but because your dependence on noise dissolves. The Stoic does not seek dominance over others. He seeks command over himself. In that command, he finds stability, clarity, and quiet power. Reflect on where silence may serve you better than speech. If this philosophy resonates, remain here and continue the practice. Subscribe to Anonymous Achiever if you choose, and carry this discipline forward with dignity.